Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. Really quick, before we jump into today's episode, I just want to tell you about an exciting event that's coming up this weekend with Memory's Journey. Memory's Journey is a 12-hour Commander stream dedicated to raising money to support Alzheimer's research. As you might be aware, Alzheimer's is a disease that has impacted many families out there, including my own. So a huge thank you to Command the Cause, Commander-at-Arms, Deck Tuner, and Monarch for putting this together. 13 guests, including myself, are going to be joining this stream to help support this awesome cause. So make sure you tune into the stream on this Saturday, October 2nd. The stream starts at 11 a.m. Eastern Time and goes all the way to 11 p.m. Eastern Time, and it's going to include some of your favorite Magic content creators and Magic personalities. I'll be joining the stream to play a game of Commander at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time with Zach and Cal from Playing with Power and our host Jake. So make sure you check out that game and all the other ones in the entire event schedule you can find in the description below. Thank you in advance for joining us and supporting this awesome cause. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in for the Commander's Core Studio. Welcome to the show. Today's episode comes to you courtesy of Nathaniel, who's been supporting this channel as a general tier patron. I truly couldn't do this without the support from amazing patrons like Nathaniel, so Nathaniel, thank you so much. And for the personalized deck tech, Nathaniel chose Horobi Death's Wail as the commander. And the theme of the deck is going to contain a good amount of field control, but the main thing that Nathaniel wanted me to consider is an irregular or unusual win condition. So let's jump into Horobi. Horobi is a 4/4 spirit that costs 2 black. It has flying, but more importantly, it has whenever a creature becomes the target of a spell or ability, destroy that creature. That is an incredibly powerful effect. And though Horobi is definitely not a popular commander by any means, it can definitely command a table when it's in play. Now, do keep in mind that this counts your creatures as well, including Horobi. But whereas we're going to focus on an absurd amount of ways to target our opponent's creatures, our opponents, well, they're not going to have those same ways. And in fact, outside of targeted removal, they're probably not going to have many ways to target our creatures. So yes, their targeted removal spells can take out our creatures, and they might have some miscellaneous effects, but believe me, we're going to have a lot more. So at a certain point, once we're set up correctly, it's going to be absolutely impossible for our opponents to keep any of their creatures in play. And then from there, we can use one of those unusual ways to win, and we'll talk about those here in a bit. But for now, let's jump into those ways to target our opponent's creatures with ease. And one more thing, really quick before we jump into the cards, every single card in this deck outside of the commander is less than $1. So this deck is incredibly budget friendly, and it can definitely pack a punch. But with all that said, let's jump into the cards. First up, we're going to be utilizing some artifacts like Squeeze Toy, Distorting Lens, and Liquid Metal Coating. Squeeze Toy is pretty much the perfect illustration of a card that is basically useless everywhere else in Commander, but not for Horobi. It's an artifact for 1, and its Oracle text reads, tap, prevent the next 1 damage to be dealt to target creature this turn. Yeah, that is an incredibly weak effect in basically any other deck, but again, in combination with Horobi, this is a 1-mana artifact that says, tap, destroy target creature. So yeah, this commander is definitely one of those commanders that's kind of an island of misfit toys. And of course, those toys include Squeeze Toy, apparently. Regardless, next up we've got Distorting Lens, which can tap to make target permanent the color of our choice until end of turn, and Liquid Metal Coating, which can tap to make something an artifact until end of turn. And yeah, those things really don't matter because all we're going to be doing is targeting creatures and they're going to be destroyed. So next up, we've got some more artifacts with some abilities that really don't matter. The only thing that matters is that they can target a creature. Tower of Coriel has tap, target creature can't be blocked by walls until end of turn. And then both the Scale and Tooth of Chisgoria have affinity for artifacts, so basically they can be free, and then they also can tap to target a creature. Oh, and on top of that, they can be played as an instant, so yeah, these can be very impactful in this deck. Next up, a creature like Rothy Trapper can also help us out and has pay a black tap target creature, but again, it's not going to be tapping it, it's going to be destroying it. And 1 mana to destroy a creature, well, that's a pretty good deal to me. And speaking of that, now let's talk about the golden pig of this deck, which is the #1 card out of our 99. And the golden pig of this deck is Tetzimoc Primal Death. Tetzimoc is a 6/6 Elder Dinosaur with Death Touch that costs 4 black. It has pay a black, reveal it from your hand, put a prey counter on target creature, activate this ability only during your turn. And the last part doesn't really matter for this deck's purposes, but I'll read it real quick. When Tetzimoc enters the battlefield, destroy a creature your opponents control a prey counter on it. Yeah, that's not necessary in this deck because, again, our opponent's creatures aren't going to stick around when we target them with this. Tetzimoc is an absolutely incredible card in combination with Horobi, and unlike probably any other golden pig that I've ever mentioned, we never have to play this card for it to be incredibly effective. In fact, it's only really effective if we don't play it. As long as this is in our hand and our commander's on the field, during our turn we can just pay a black mana to take out any creature. So unless our opponents can force us to discard this card, this is just permanent removal that they can't deal with. And that is absolutely incredible and incredibly powerful, and that's what makes it the Golden Pig. Next up, some other fantastic cards in this deck, though, are Retribution of the Ancients, Jade Monolith, and Bloodthirsty Blade. Retribution of the Ancients is essentially pay a black, destroy target creature. And then Jade Monolith and Bloodthirsty Blade are basically pay one generic mana, destroy any creature, though Bloodthirsty Blade can only be done during our turn. Regardless, yeah, that's incredibly efficient, being able to take out creatures for just 1 mana. Slightly less efficient, but still incredibly effective in this deck are Sacred Armory, Baton of Morale, and Drana. Sacred Armory has pay 2, target creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Baton of Morale is going to give the creature banding, and Drana, well, we just have to pay black, and target creature gets -0/-0, but it doesn't matter because they're going to be dead. And the final card that I want to bring up in this section is one that doesn't target creatures, but it helps us target them. And that card would be Glaring Spotlight, which says creatures your opponents control with hexproof can be the targets of spells and abilities you control as though they didn't have hexproof. So this in play, very few creatures are going to be safe from the wrath of Horobi. And that wrath is not done just yet. Because next up, let's talk about Caustic Crawler in Retreat to Hagra, which can take out our opponent's creatures just by putting a land into play. Caustic Crawler has, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may have target creature get -1/-1 until end of turn. And then Retreat to Hagra gives us an option. It says target creature gets +1/+0 and gains Death Touch until end of turn, or each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Now in most decks, we would not be utilizing that first option for an opponent's creature, but with this deck, yeah, we're going to be taking out creatures with lands. We can also take out our opponent's creatures just by getting our own creatures into play. Shadow Alley Denizen says, whenever another black creature enters the battlefield under your control, target creature gains Intimidate until end of turn. And then Orc Sure Shot says, whenever the creature enters the battlefield under your control, target creature an opponent controls gets -1/-1 until end of turn. So yeah, with these in play, every single one of our creatures essentially become a Ravenous Chupacabra or a Necrotal or whatever creature has that ETB that destroys. But one that can be even more devastating is Mogus's Marauder. It has, when it enters the battlefield, up to X target creatures gain Intimidate and Haste until end of turn, where X is your devotion to black. This is basically, hey, it comes into play and pretty much is going to wipe out all of your opponent's creatures. Again, if we've got 1 devotion for every single one of our opponent's creatures, they're going to be gone. Another nice, repeatable, essentially, board wipe is with Nefashu. It has, whenever it attacks, up to 5 target creatures get -1/-1 until end of turn. And then Shambling Swarm can take out opponent's creatures in a different way. It says, when it's put into a graveyard from play, distribute 3 -1/-1 counters among 1, 2, or 3 target creatures. Remove those counters at end of turn. And keep in mind, though this is a death trigger, it's very easy for us to get. If we just have one way to take this out, we can take 3 opponent's creatures out. But what are some of the ways that we can benefit from creatures dying? First up, let's talk about Sir Conrad the Grim, Zulaport Cutthroat, and Falkenrath Noble. Sir Conrad the Grim essentially punishes opponents whenever creatures go anywhere. He has, whenever another creature dies or a creature card is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature card leaves the graveyard, Sir Conrad the Grim deals 1 damage to each opponent. And then Zulaport Cutthroat says, whenever it or another creature we control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and we gain 1 life. Falkenrath Noble is somewhat similar but more targeted. It says, whenever it or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Regardless, each of these are very effective at taking our opponent's life totals down. And speaking of life totals, let's talk about Sangromancer. It has, whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you may gain 3 life. So yeah, with this in play, our life total can jump to an incredible amount in no time. And we can actually grow a giant army in no time with Ogre Slumlord. It says, whenever another non-token creature dies, you may create a 1/1 black rat creature token. Keep in mind that in combination with Shadow Alley Denizen and Orc Sure Shot, this is pretty much, hey, wipe out all of your opponent's non-token creatures. And of course, what's left over is a giant red army for you. Next up, we also have some ways to utilize our opponent's creatures that we take out with Beacon of Unrest, Sepulchral Primordial, and Mimic Vat. Beacon of Unrest says put target artifact or creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control, and then we shuffle it into our library. Sepulchral Primordial has, when it enters the battlefield, for each opponent you may put up to 1 target creature card from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. And then Mimic Vat has imprint. Whenever another non-token creature dies, you may exile that card. If you do, return each other card exiled with Mimic Vat to its owner's graveyard. And by paying 3 and tapping it, we get a token that's a copy of a card exiled with Mimic Vat. It gains haste, exiled at the beginning of the next end step. So yeah, there are definitely a lot of avenues to victory for this deck, and I haven't even talked about the unusual ones yet, which we'll get to here in a bit. But next up, let's talk about our ramp package, and we actually have some sources of ramp that can actually take out our opponent's creatures as well. Liquid Metal Torque can tap for a colorless, or we can tap and target non-land permanent becomes an artifact and issues other types until end of turn. And then Tetzimoc can tap for 1 mana of any color, or we can tap and target creature becomes the color or colors of your choice until end of turn. Next up, let's quickly go through some standard ramp cards with Sphere of the Suns, Prismatic Lens, Everflowing Chalice, Mind Stone, Guardian Idol, Charcoal Diamond, and Hedron Archive. Next up, though, we actually have one more mana rock that can take things out with Unstable Obelisk. It can tap for a color, so we can pay 7 and tap to sacrifice it to destroy target permanent. And speaking of taking things out, Feed the Swarm says destroy target creature or enchantment opponent controls, you lose life equal to that permanent's mana value. But we also have a way to protect our own creatures with Wail the Nim. It says choose 1, regenerate each creature you control, or Wail the Nim deals 1 damage to each creature and each player, and we can entwine it for a black. Next up, let's talk about some ways to generate card advantage with cards like Harvester of Souls, Cathoped Soul Hoarder, and Shadows of the Past. Harvester of Souls says whenever another non-token creature dies, you may draw a card. Keep in mind this counts our opponent's creatures as well, so we're going to be drawing quite a bit. And then the Soul Hoarder can also help us draw an absurd amount of cards. It says whenever a permanent owned by another player is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you draw a card and lose 1 life. And then Shadows of the Past says whenever a creature dies, scry 1. And although scrying isn't card advantage, it is card selection. We also have some cantrips that can help us out though with Aphotic Wisp and Night Haze. Each of these essentially act as a removal spell, being able to target a creature, and they draw us a card. Next up, let's quickly go through some more standard ways to draw cards with Sign in Blood, Read the Bones, Blood Pact, Succumb to Temptation, Ambition's Cost, Ancient Craving, and Greed. And finally, in this deck, we are going to be running 2 tutors with Diabolic Tutor and Razcast Right. Each of these can get us any card from our library directly into our hand, and Razcast Right has cycling for black as well. And some of those things that we might tutor for very well might be our Golden Pig, which again works fantastically when it's just in our hand, or, maybe an unusual way to win. So let's talk about some off-the-wall combos to finish our opponents off that you pretty much never see. And the first combo is going to revolve around a card like Underworld Dreams, Fate Unraveler, or Ob Nixilis the Hate Twisted. Each of these essentially does the exact same thing. They have whenever an opponent draws a card, they deal 1 damage to that player. And these work in fantastic combination with, let's just say, a very unique card. And that card would be Peer into the Abyss. It says target player draws cards equal to half the number of cards in their library and loses half their life, round up each time. So, for example, let's just say an opponent has, 80 cards left in their library when we cast this, and they're at 40 life. They would draw 40 cards and go down to 20 life. But if we have something like Underworld Dreams in play, for every single one of those cards that they're drawing, they're taking a damage. So because of that, they just took an extra 40 damage, and yeah, they're taken out of the game. Now, Peer into the Abyss also works in combination with another card, Warlock class. It's a class enchantment that says at the beginning of your end step, if a creature died this turn, each opponent loses 1 life. At level 2, it says when this class becomes level 2, look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 1 of them in your hand, the rest in your graveyard. But level 3 is where it gets really spicy. It says at the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses life equal to the life they lost this turn. So basically, again, they lost half their life rounded up from Peer to the Abyss, and now they lose half their life again. But actually, the card that this works best in combination with is Fraying Omnipotence. It says each player loses half their life, then discards half the cards in their hand, then sacrifices half the creatures they control, round up each time. Again, Warlock class is going to make every opponent lose life equal to the life they lost this turn, and Fraying Omnipotence makes them lose half their life, so yeah, they're going to be gone at the end of the turn. And then Warlock class also works with Virtus the Veiled, which says when it deals combat damage to a player, that player loses half their life rounded up. And with a deck like this, we can essentially guarantee that we're going to be able to get Virtus the Veiled through, because again, we can just take out our opponent's creatures very easily with a lot of our things. So yeah, there are a lot of off-the-wall and fun ways that we can take our opponents out with a deck like this. But now that we've talked about every single non-land card in this deck, let's talk about the price. Like I mentioned at the start of this episode, every single card in this deck outside of our commander is less than $1. And even with our commander's $3.51 price tag, the estimated cost of this deck is just $35.60. Also keep in mind that this actually includes the cost of basic lands at 10 cents a piece, so if you already have those swamps, your deck's going to be even cheaper. On top of that, this does not include heavily played or damaged cards, so if you buy those on TCG Player, your deck can be even more affordable than that. Though, do keep in mind that this cost does not include the cost of shipping, which might vary depending upon where you live. And with that, this show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one.